Now, when you come to this screen, right? So this is the number of instances, only one. We are creating one. Network. Now here you can see by default, I've selected this webinar, right? There are multiple VPC that are available here, but I'm selecting the one which was webinar VPC, which we just created, right? The subnet. So this was the subnet we created, right? So this was the webinar subnet we created. Now again, you could create a private versus public subnets, right? And define that over here. So if I had created 2 subnets, then I would see 2 subnets over here, which means, again, let me just refer back to this PowerPoint. So if you had created these 2 separate subnet 1 and 2 with a different IP address range, then you would actually see those 2 subnets available here, and you can pick the one that you want to. Why do you need this? Again, if you remember, I talked about the private subnet where you can define your database instances, right? So you can say, okay, my database would be actually behind this private subnet versus my web server would be behind my public subnet. So when you are launching this EC2 instance, if this is your web server, you would actually put it behind your public subnet because everybody is coming in and accessing that public subnet using a www whatever. But if you're accessing your database, which your application server needs to talk to, then you would most likely, and I highly recommend it, within the architecture, you have to think about it, but we would put your database behind that private subnet. Hopefully that would make sense what I'm saying, right? Using auto-assigned public IP, so what happens is if you continuously start creating IP EC2 instance within a subnet, the range that you give in setting up that VPC and then subnet, you would actually, the automatic assignment of the IP address will be done by AWS, picking up the IP range from the subnet IP CIDR block range that you have defined. So what I mean by that is if you have defined, let's say here 10.0.0.24, right? So you would have 32 minus 24, so 2 to the power 8, 256, right? So you would have 256 IP address range. So whenever you are assigning a new EC2 instance to this subnet 1, the IP address will be 10.0.0.1. blah, 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 all the ways up to 256 machines that you can launch over here. Now, if you start assigning machines over here, then it would be 10.0.1.0, and then, of course, it would start, incrementing the numbers in that range, right? So depending on which subnet you have picked when you're launching your EC2 instance, number one. And number two is that how many IP addresses are available with an IP address range CIDR block that you have defined, right? So this would be all determined on your setup when you're doing the subnet and VPC. So you can see there are only 251 IP address range available, right? Because of the way that VPC was set up. Placement group, everything else, you can probably leave it. This was the main thing that I want to show you guys. Storage, again, by default comes with 8 gigabyte. Configure security group. Now, security group, create a new security group, right? So this is where I was talking about you can define your IP addresses and stuff like that. For now, let's use the selected default security group, and I'll show you in a second how to create that security group. Choose an existing demo key, for example, acknowledge, and launch an instance. Now, what's happening, obviously, is just trying to launch that instance within that VPC, within that subnet. So this is going to go ahead and start to spin that off, right? So while it's doing that, why don't we jump over to the security groups, right? So security groups are, again, where you are defining the rules and IP address and the protocols, right? So if I go click on create a security group, so let me create a webinar. And you can have a security group where you say, okay, the SSH protocol would be allowed in that security group. This security group would be for database, IP database accessibility. So you can have different security groups defined based on that. And which VPC you are creating the security group in. And this would be webinar VPC that we just created. Shane, just checking, you can still see my Amazon console, correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
I can. That's correct.
Perfect. So this is the security group I'm defining within this VPC, right? Let me just go ahead and create first, and then I'll come back. Okay, so here's a security group name, owner, ID, description, and the VPC, which is associated with this. Inbound rule. Now, this is where you would start defining who can access or who can come in to your EC2 instance, right? So I can say added inbound rule, add rule, custom IP. These are all the protocols that are available, right? All traffic, all TCP, UDP, all traffic, SSH, SMTP, ping, right? So you can define all of that stuff here, right? So for example, if I say all traffic and protocol is all, of course, and then I'm not, if I would have changed this, then you would actually define protocol and port range. But since I'm saying all kind of traffic is allowed here, right, which is not a good practice. Obviously, you want to limit what comes in. Now, the source IP is where you are actually the request is generated or originated from. So whether you want to say, okay, this IP address, a specific IP address, or range, right? So I'm going to say, go ahead and say my IP address, right? Which means my local machine, 76, 71, 29, 193, 32. 32 is because, remember, 2 to the power 32 minus 32 is 0. So it's the one specific IP address which is being allowed to access all kinds of traffic on that security group, right? And save. There we go. Okay. So this is the rule that I have defined here. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in EC2 instance under that security group. Okay. So let's see. We have created. We can go ahead and create one more instance. Let's say free tier, select. Okay, next. Okay, I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to leave this as is. Previously, 1 second. Okay, so that's fine. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now create a security group or select an existing. So I'm going to select an existing security group, and I'm going to select my webinar security group because I have allowed a VPC access to it, this IP address available to it, right? So here we go. Launch. I think I should do that. And I'm going to use a demo key as my AP key. Okay. And let's see. This is the IP address. So now I have created this EC2 instance associated with this VPC with that EC2 instance and assign a security group with this. And if you want to see the rules, you can go ahead and review the rules by clicking on View Inbound Rules, View Outbound Rules, and I would actually tell you everything is allowed from this machine inbound. This is the IP address that was actually my IP address that I have allowed. So all ports, all protocol, this IP address allowed to actually access this machine. Let's see. I just want to check this. Once it's done, then I want to see if I can access this. Okay.